Welcome to episode 3 of Beyond the Pillion podcast. My name is Kahiwa, Sebire, she, her pronouns, and I am the chaotic one.
And I am Mark Drechsler, he, him pronouns, and as far as I'm concerned, the car can live in the street as long as the bikes are in the shed.
Today we are talking about buying your first bike, including a little bit of my experience of trying to buy my first bike.
Which will be a good story. And of course, we would like to begin today's podcast by acknowledging that today we are recording this podcast on the land of the Kaurna people and to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging.
Absolutely. And as with all things, and as we warned you in the trailer and in our first episode, the right first bike for you is going to depend. If you've come to this podcast expecting to get a single one model or make to just go out and search for and buy, no. But what we will be giving you are a list of things, a list of questions, of things to consider about what is going to be the right first bike for you, because it will depend on a whole bunch of things, including your budget, your preferences, potentially your body shape or height, your confidence and comfort, where and how you intend to ride, and so much more.
Absolutely.
So the first and most important question, though, is this. What are you going to use your bike for? Mark?
Yep, this is a very, very common question. That is a very common question that I ask when people come into the store, particularly new riders who walk into the store. They're not sure what they're looking for. They know they want to ride, but they say, I've just got my license. Is very typical. I just went and did my my learner's permit course on the weekend, and I'm brand new and I need to buy a motorbike. What would you recommend? And the first question I will come back to them is, what is the main thing you're going to be using the bike for? So is it going to be some of the most common ones, or is it something that you just need to commute around, within the sort of 10 to 15k radius around the Adelaide flat bit? Is it something you're looking at more as a social relaxation type of thing, just to go out and do some fun rides in the evenings or on the weekends? Are you looking at something that can do long rides, or are you just going to be doing mostly short stuff? Do you need something that can comfortably sit on highway speeds for long periods of time, or do you just need something that's going to be able to at least do sort of 60 k's an hour, 80 k's an hour? Are you ever going to be expecting to take the bike on any dirt, or is it going to be a full-time? Most of your riding is off-road riding, or is it going to be exclusively on the road? So those are some of the most common questions that as soon as a person comes in saying, I don't know where to start, what bike is the best one for me, I get them to start thinking about, what is your use case? What are the main things that you're going to be doing?
Yeah, because that really then leads into two key criteria. As an evaluator, I like to think about broad criteria first and then use that to narrow down to specific models. But so that type of riding, if you're commuting, is it relaxation? Is it longer rides? Is it going super speedy and fast? Is it dirt or off-roads? That's going to help you narrow down to whether you're looking at bikes in a super sport category, a sports tourer, or cruisers, or adventure tourers, or dirt bikes. And particularly if you're using an online website, that's just going to be helpful to filter down your bikes and have a conversation with staff at a dealership. It also then connects into the size of bike. So the size of the engine, as well as typically the kind of physical size. Are you looking for something that is small and light and zippy for kind of short rides or commuting? Are you looking for something that's easy to maneuver, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit more comfortable at higher speeds? Then you might be looking at something in a 4 to 600 cc kind of range, as opposed to 1 to 300 cc's. Or are you looking for something?
And if I could throw in something there. Sorry, I was just going to say in there, one that is closely connected with that is your physical size and strength. So the amount of how strong you are will actually determine, in a lot of cases, the size of bike that you are going to feel comfortable with, particularly as your first bike.
Absolutely, yeah. So the type of bike is that's going to be right for you, or that's going to be a good option, is going to depend on you and your use cases. So those become two kind of things to think about. I think some of the other criteria that I know that we talked about when I was looking at buying my first bike was something about the age. Do you want something maybe a bit newer? Often has kind of more gadgets and gizmos, and especially now safety features like ABS.
Yes, absolutely.
But they can cost a little bit more. Or you're comfortable with something a little bit older, usually a bit more affordable, but they might have some quirks. In my case, having a choke on my first bike, which I hated, which was excellent motivation to get onto a bigger bike. But
or at least a newer
also,
bike.
a newer bike. I really liked shifting from having a choke to fuel injection, and things like gear gauges and having a speedometer and a tachometer are things that I look for in a bike, and that can be more prevalent in newer bikes, but that can also just be a feature. And maybe something a little bit more particular to women and people assigned female at birth, but something about the style and colour. I think men also think about this, but it might not be as important to you, but for me it was definitely very important. I wanted a bike that I wanted to look at, that I felt like I looked good on, that made me want to ride it, to take care of it. I also like brighter colours. Partially it's a safety thing to try and increase visibility, but also because I just like colour, and a matte black bike is not congruent with me as a person, let alone as a rider. But other people might have a different kind of vibe, and that's also totally valid and useful to know if you have a particular style or feel that you want out of a bike. For me, there are certain shapes of bikes that they just don't work for me. They are not, they're not things that I enjoy, and so that helped to really narrow down the field, to just go, that doesn't feel right. Sometimes that didn't quite make sense to you, Mark, did it, when we were going through models of bikes, of things that I liked or things that I didn't?
It didn't, but it also kind of highlighted to me, I'm a fairly logical sort of person. It did highlight to me that buying a bike can often be a lot more emotive than buying a car. I've noticed that selling bikes for almost a year now, that a lot of the time it really is a very emotional type of connection when people are looking for a particular bike, and colour does really come into it. Often a car, not always, but I think a lot more often, cars kind of boil down to the facts and figures and the cost and the fuel economy and then this and that and everything else. Bikes tend to have a lot more people, I've found, that are, what's the one I just want to get on and ride? And I will often have that conversation with people, that if you're narrowing it down and you've done your initial shortlisting to come down to maybe a handful of bikes, and any one of them could be the one, it is a genuine thing for me that I say to people, to say, which is the one that you just look at and you just want to get on it more, and factor that into your thinking, because the one that you do have a connection with, and I know you have this with your current bike, and you probably have with your other previous bikes, Kahiwa, that you do have a real emotional attraction to just look at it and say, I don't have to explain why, I just like it.
Yeah, and I think it connects to some of the intangible benefits or intangible motivators for wanting to ride, wanting to become a motorcyclist, that we alluded to in the previous episode. So it makes sense then, if part of the reason that we might be wanting to get a bike, to ride a bike, is about emotion, is about vision and self-actualization and self-presentation and all that kind of stuff. It therefore makes sense that one of the things that might influence the bike that works for you, or that lights your switch, could be more emotive and not a purely logical, quantifiable criteria. And I suppose what trying to say is that is totally valid and that is okay. And you are allowed
Absolutely
to
right.
just want a bike because you like the bike. That's totally cool.
Yep.
Here to
Or
support that.
yeah, or that you just like the colour.
Mm-hmm.
The only sort of counter to that is to say, depending on the bike you're looking at, if you particularly if you can see past a colour and just like the shape of the bike, then there are always options around getting panels resprayed, about getting panels wrapped. We see that from time to time. It doesn't have to be if you love the shape of a bike, but you just hate the colour, because particularly some manufacturers, and I'm not looking at any in particular, tend to have maybe three colours on offer every year. Two of them don't tend to change from year to year. One of them will be black. One of them will be whatever the signature colour of that brand is, and the third one will be something different. Other brands have seemingly every colour under the rainbow. There's no one rule for each manufacturer, but and even years of bikes between year to year, where Kahiwa, you love your yellow one that was only released in 2016. We won't see another yellow one in the model that you've got until probably, if we're lucky, 2026. So yeah, but for you, even if you hadn't got that one, we could have bought the same model, swapped over the panels on it, or got them wrapped or resprayed, and boom, you've got something that's in the shape you like, in the colour you like. So it's sometimes it's hard, I think, as a new buyer to look past that if you really do want to go down that path. And often, what's the one that's the nicest colour? Yep, cool, I'll go that way.
And I think what it comes down to really is just doing your research. So starting out by thinking about what type of ride do you want to be able to do. Therefore, what are some different characteristics of bikes that work well for that type of ride? And then, what preferences do you have in terms of newer versus older? What's your budget? All that kind of thing. So once you've come up with a bunch of those different potential options, then odds are there are going to be a lot of online reviews to have a look at the characteristics of the bike, the strengths and weaknesses, a lot of online reviews with actual like videos of rides on YouTube, online reviews, and even just talking to kind of friends or people in a network can be really helpful to get some information.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably the only slight caveat there is that if there is one thing that there is no shortage of on the internet, it is opinions. Very often those are ill-informed. You will find plenty of contradictory ones. I think if you want to jump onto any motorcycling forum and start a fight, jump on there and ask what's the best oil that I should use on my engine oil I should use in my insert motorbike name here. Then just grab your popcorn, sit back and watch people tear each other to pieces. The other one is what's the best way to clean my chain? Something as simple as that, but you will get one of multiple camps that will all arc up within about two or three sentences into a full-scale fight about what's right versus wrong. So as with anything, when you're looking on the internet, there's great information. Bring a little bit of skepticism to the table and ask yourself, why should you trust the views of this person? What's the likelihood that their view is a very isolated one? Versus, no, this seems to be the general wisdom.
Yeah, because of that previous emotion-driven comment that we were talking about earlier, I think also, you've got permission here to just go with your gut. If the reviews are saying something and you're feeling something different, then your view is valid. So go with that. I think another similar hot conversation starter that I've seen in the online forums and groups that I'm in is particularly from women asking something along the lines of, I'm 150, 160 centimeters tall. What's a good bike for me? And invariably people suggest specific models, which can be helpful to know. Others, maybe less helpfully, in my opinion, might suggest to just get used to it and you can ride any bike, which is true. However, there are advantages to having a bike that is designed for or suits your height. And Mark, that's something you see quite a bit in your line of
Yeah,
work.
absolutely. And I've had to break up conversations between couples more than one occasion where the one partner who's been riding for longer says, "No, you'll get over it," and the other person who tends to be shorter is saying, "No, I don't feel confident." And confidence is the word to zoom in on there, because there is so much and Kahiwa will talk more about this later, when you're just beginning, is about feeling confident on whatever bike you are on. So I tend to, in those situations, I've never gone down the path of saying, "Yep, suck it up, you'll get used to it." What I do though is to at least, for the ones that we sell, try and know the ones which can be lowered. So something that doesn't get talked about a lot in online forums, but is absolutely a thing for a whole lot of different bikes, new and old, is that a lot of them can be lowered. Often it'll need some extra parts to be bought, and probably need a motorbike workshop to be able to do it. But very often you can get a bike that's that will be able to be dropped down anywhere from like 2 to 5 centimeters, without all that much effort. And if you're not sure about your particular bike, if you're shortlisting your bikes, and you've got one you think, "Oh, that looks good, but I think it'll be too tall," just do a Google search for the name of the bike and lowering kit, and you will find out pretty quickly whether or not there are kits available that can help lower a bike that otherwise could be perfect.
Yeah, that's what happened for me when I took my MT-07 out for a test ride, and trying to do a U-turn and trying to come out of relatively steep kind of berm down into the sidewalk and into the gutter, and I couldn't quite get both of the balls of my feet on the ground trying to paddle walk and up and down and stuff like that, and came back and advised, "Yep, there's a lowering kit available." As you said, it was a couple of $100, done by the workshop, and they would do that as part of getting the bike ready for me to pick up, and it was great. It only needed a couple of centimeters for me, but it just made the biggest difference, feeling confident that I could paddle walk the bike if I needed to, that I could get both of my feet down on the ground, even just the balls of my feet, to be able to just switch off or relax the body a bit more if I was at a stop or at traffic lights, and that does make a huge difference.
Yep, completely agree with you. And the other thing I would add on to that is, and I'll talk about going and having a look at bike shops very shortly, but when you are looking at different bikes and sitting on different bikes, try and go around to the bike stores or wherever you're going with riding shoes on, rather than thongs or very thin sneakers, because I have a lot of people come in, they'll jump on a bike, they're wearing their thin, relatively thin-soled sneakers, and I say, yeah, look, yes, maybe it's a bit of a stretch with that, but you're going to add on another centimetre by having some proper bike shoes or boots that have got nice thick soles on them. So, yeah.
Yep.
That is, you can get a bit at the top and a bit at the bottom, and add those things together, and next thing you know, you've got a bike that does feel uncomfortably tall, feeling far more manageable.
Definitely going out to see bikes and bike shops can be quite useful. You've got some tips around that.
Yeah, just so those questions that I talked above, absolutely go out and do some nosing around different motorbike shops once you've got your short list. If it's a bike shop that's worth their salt, then they should be asking you some of the questions above to help you narrow down your choices that you might have. And every now and again, you might have done your shortlisting based on what you found on the internet, but I have had situations where I try and throw a wildcard entry in to say, look, yeah, I reckon it's A, B, and C are probably the three most likely. But if you want a wild card that might be slightly different, that you might not have thought about, here's this other bike over there. And sometimes that does make people think, oh, hang on a minute. If I was to throw this to Kahiwa as an evaluator, they look and they think, yeah, actually, maybe my evaluation criteria weren't set up properly in the first place. And maybe what I've come down to with my shortlisting, I'm actually thinking about the wrong things, aren't I? So definitely go in, have a chat with your local bike shop and your local bike shops, and see what you can find out by sitting on them if they have them in stock. Be prepared that if you're buying a new bike, there's no guarantee that they will have that particular model in stock. Sometimes, hopefully, they will. We certainly try and keep them, but it really depends on how much stock has come into the country, when the manufacturers are releasing them, and everything else. So, at times that might be tricky.
Yeah. And I think when you go to start to look at the different bikes in the bike shops that and just have a set on them, that can really help you to work out your shortlist of bikes.
Totally.
As you were saying, Mark, and potentially having a bit of a wild card option in there. And that should help you then work out what are some actual the actual examples that you might be keen on, down to specific models. And that's when you can start thinking about whether you want to buy new or used. And if you're buying used, whether you want to buy through a dealer or buy privately. They've all got their advantages and their disadvantages and their challenges and their opportunities. Mark, you've got some advice around buying new bikes.
Yeah. So, I mean, new bikes, it's probably a similar process to buying a new car for anybody who's bought a new car, and some of the standard things to go and ask about when you are looking at new bikes, because it will vary between makers. Warranty is one of the things which may vary. So I think most at the moment you would find would offer anywhere between 1 and 3 years of warranty from the time that you buy the new bike. They'll all cover, basically for the bike to operate as you would expect it to operate, but not cover things like consumables. So, for example, if you wear out a tyre, then you've worn out a tyre because you rode on it. Another one is service intervals. So service intervals and service cost. So that can vary from bike to bike. So it's a useful one to ask in terms of longer term total cost of ownership for the bike. To say if you are buying a new bike because you're planning on keeping it for 3, 4, 5 years, then it's worth just understanding firstly the service schedule, and it's also worth having a look at when major services are due. So similar to a car, motorbikes will, if I think about the brands that I sell, one of them has major services, which is getting in and adjusting a particular part in the motor that takes a bit of work. One of them needs adjustment every 10,000 Ks, and the other one needs adjustment every 40,000 Ks. So there's quite a bit of variability there in how often you can expect that you'll need to be paying for some of the bigger services. Once you've started doing that, that'll help you in your shortlisting. Also looking at stock availability. So as I kind of hinted at before, there are some models that we sell that if you want one, I've got half a dozen that I can get you on by tomorrow. There are others where I'd be saying, give me a deposit now and I'll give you a call back in 6 months. So the availability is something. Don't assume that every motorbike you see on the internet from any new seller is going to be available when you walk in, and you can just grab one and right away and not the following day. I think COVID and just the general state of the world has probably changed that for a good while to come. And finally, when you're shopping around, you'll find that most places selling new bikes, they're all going to be using a recommended retail or thereabouts. But it can also be a great time if you are brand new to be hitting up those shops to say, well, you're a brand new rider, you're going to need, as we talked about in the last episodes, at least a helmet and some gloves and maybe some other gear as well. So put them on the spot to look at what kind of deal they can do as you are getting set up, because often that is a great time for a dealer to be able to say, well, I'm selling a whole package here. I've got more room to move on being able to bundle together a bunch of stuff in terms of putting a discount on it.
I think that is, just in terms of room to move, is probably something to bear in mind If you've never bought a motorcycle before but are familiar with buying a car, typically, discounting or negotiating on the price of motorcycles is a lot less and a lot less common in comparison to buying cars.
Ultimately, they
just kind of
typically cheaper vehicles. Yeah, they are lower cost vehicles, and therefore, what might seem, saving $100 or $200 off a bike might be the equivalent of saving, many hundreds of dollars on a car that's worth, 5 times as much. So yeah, it's all economies of scale.
Yep. And I think the other thing you've shared a lot is thinking about how you're going to store your bike, and that when you're buying your first bike, particularly if you're also looking at getting gear and other things, it can be useful to think about how you're going to store it, because bikes are a lot more vulnerable to the elements than cars are. I know in a previous house where we lived, where it had a kind of open carport at the back, we had a few bikes that were regularly undercover, had little bike covers that would live on those bikes, and that's a really nice way to try and keep the bike in good condition, not only just in terms of your enjoyment, but also in terms of keeping its resale value down the line if you do decide to sell it. But thinking about where you're going to store your bike and how you're going to store it and what you might need for that, or therefore does that influence how much you might want to spend on it, or the type of bike that you might want to get, can also be an important factor.
Yeah, I'll just double down on that one as well to say motorbikes are more delicate creatures compared to a car. I mean, my intro today about the car living outside is genuine. The car does live outside. Firstly, because I don't care about it as much as I care about my motorbikes, but also just because it is a lot more resilient. There's a lot less nooks and crannies for water and salt and dirt and everything else to get into compared to a car. And the better you look after your bike, the better you are going to better time you're going to have later on when it comes to resale value. And I'll talk a bit more about this when we do our next podcast episode about second-hand bikes, but I suppose buying a new bike, which eventually will be a second-hand bike, keep it clean, keep it serviced, keep all of the original bits and paperwork and books and things like that, and you are going to make your life much easier later on when you are coming to when your bike is now a second-hand bike and you're trying to get the most that you possibly can for it.
Which I think is a really nice segue into our final overarching point here. When you're thinking about buying your first bike.
What a coincidence.
Nah, almost like we'd planned it.
Yeah, I know,
when
right.
you're buying your first bike, keep in mind that this doesn't have to be your only bike that you have forever and ever. I think it's quite common for people to buy a first bike that might get them through their learner's permit period, particularly in South Australia, to then use that bike to do the test to get your R date, so your provisional motorcycle license. And once you're off your provisional motorcycle license onto a full motorcycle license, then the restrictions on what type of bike you can ride legally come off. And that's often a really common point in time for people to go from a smaller bike to a more powerful bike. Partly because, a couple of years of riding a bit more confident, but also because legally allowed to be able to do that does make it a bit nicer. So keep in mind that your first bike doesn't have to be your only bike. And that's certainly been my experience. We alluded to this a little bit in the first episode. But when I first got my learner's permit, we had done all of the same research that we talked about here, decided that something like a Yamaha MT-03, a Honda CB300, a Kawasaki Ninja 300, something like that would probably suit me. And after I got my learners, we went to take the first of those on the list for a test ride, the MT-03 at a local dealer, and I think not even 5 minutes in, I came up to an intersection, having forgotten what gear I was in, how to change gears, freaking out about making sure I turned my indicator on, freaking out about incoming cars and how to read the gaps and how to accelerate out. And as I came up to that corner, I fell over.
Yes.
Did
I
a
was
small amount
riding
of damage
behind,
to
and
the
I can
bike.
say it was like watching a tree gracefully fall in a rainforest. It was slowly, she started falling over, and then she fell over. Thankfully, very gently without being hurt.
That half second of falling, I swear, felt like hours, just elongated, knowing that I was falling and knowing that there was nothing that I could do, and just slowly dying inside. And that, small amount of damage to the bike, but actually quite significant damage to my confidence.
There's the C word.
Yep. I think we took a few minutes to kind of just calm down, get out of the way and calm down. And somehow, I don't remember state of mind, got the bike back to the dealership, paid the excess for the damages, and left completely mortified and really questioning if this was for me.
Yep, and I was concerned in that moment that you might have just walked away and never come back.
And I think I remembered you asking and taking a bit of time to think about it, and then coming back to the point that I wanted those intangible benefits that we spoke about in the previous episode. I wanted that vision for myself as a badass motorcycle chick. I wanted that. I wanted to be that. So Mark, you did some more research and thinking about an appropriate bike, yeah?
Yeah, which was looking at it and just thinking that the main criteria really was not about buying the longer term nicer bike that I know. The emotion part of Kahiwa said, yep, I want one of those ones. And even the on paper stuff said, yep, a 300cc something or other would be about right. But I thought, no, do a small, low-cost investment, get something low, light, underpowered, and probably the same as many, many other people who are in the similar situation ended up coming back to the totally non-threatening, Uber Eats-enabled Honda CB125E. How did you?
I'm pretty sure I ended up selling it to an Uber Eats driver.
I think they might have been actually.
Yeah, this thing, she rattled and protested thoroughly. I remember taking her on a road at 80 k's an hour. Very, very unhappy, very uncomfortable the bike was. And where we lived at the time was quite hilly and had some good hilly corners, and really needed a good dose of momentum to get up those hills and those corners. But it was perfect. To really help me rebuild some of that foundational confidence. Like you said, she was light, she was easy to maneuver, she was relatively simple to use, except for the choke. Hated the choke. And she was a gorgeous blue. It was a lovely colour. And I think we did a few months of starting in the car parks and loops around kind of local spots, and then because I was also using it to commute into the city, doing that same ride 5 days a week was a really great way to just build familiarity with the bike and with riding. I think I also did a course on road skills and cornering technique on that CB125, riding alongside people on
very slowly.
Much
on 1000cc bikes.
Yeah. Which was hilarious. But that was enough to get me back on track to the vision, to get ready for that second level license test, which passed with flying colours, slight flex, complete perfect score, no demerits or anything.
Which I've heard about ever since. Yeah.
Very, very proud of that. And so once I had that, I was ready for my second bike, the Yamaha R3, which was very similar to the original bikes that we'd researched and figured out would work. And I was also really confident taking out the CB300 and the Ninja 400 at that point out for some test rides. I had a much clearer idea about what I wanted from a bike and what felt right. And we ended up buying the R3 as a used bike, actually, through a private seller. And we'll talk a little bit more in the next episode about what to look for when buying a second-hand bike. But even that one, I had that for a couple of years, and that worked well for the types of riding I was doing at that time, which was still mostly commuting into the city, a little bit of highway riding. And then I moved on to a larger bike again, the MT-07, because I wanted something a bit more comfortable at highway speeds, a bit more of a comfortable upright seating position, but not a full kind of laid-back cruiser vibes. And that one I bought used through a dealer, actually, and I was able to get the lowering kit and similar that we mentioned. So the takeaway here is that the first bike that you own will almost certainly not be your last. I think that is a really, again, a key difference between people who ride motorcycles and a motorcyclist versus people driving cars. It is so common, the number of people I hear who are just kind of selling and upgrading or changing the bike as their life and circumstances and needs from a bike change.
And their skills as well. So looking back at your experience, Kahiwa, there's no way in the world I could have thrown you on an MT-07 on that first day of walking out of your license, even though they were learner approved. But for you, and it's not the same for everyone, but for you that wouldn't have worked. Even the 300 was enough to sort of bang your confidence a bit. The CB125 was perfect for that 6-9 month, whatever it was, period. And as your skills have developed, you feel more comfortable. Your options start to open out a lot more as well because you are more skilled, and the journey just continues. So absolutely right with that takeaway, that don't think about your first bike as having to be perfect. It is a bit of a test case. That is where I tend to also say to people, trying to go for a relatively inexpensive first bike is probably not a bad thing, whether that's private or, new or used, private or dealer, whatever it is. Try and keep that to a relatively low extent, because the first one will be working out what it is you do and don't like, and what it is you do and don't want in a bike. And that's totally fine. That's all a part of the wonderful journey that is bike life.
The journey. It's a learning experience.
Sorry.
And as we mentioned, the right bike it'll depend on a lot of different variables. And there also might not be one clear right bike for you. There might be multiple options. And so this is potentially where that emotive driver might come into play, looking at things on paper and then actually sitting or testing and just getting a feel for which one feels right for right now.
Cool.
So that's about buying your first bike and some things to keep in mind. And next episode, we will be looking specifically at some things to think about when you are buying a second-hand bike, which might also be things to think about in terms of maintenance and upkeep of your current bike, should you ever be thinking about selling it. What are some things you can be doing to maintain the resale value of your bike? Until then, if you are going to be riding, then we hope that you ride safe and have fun and come back soon. This is Beyond the Pillion with your hosts Kahiwa Sebire and Mark Drechsler. Find us on Instagram and YouTube as Beyond the Pillion. Leave a comment to let us know what you'd like to know more about. And if you liked us, remember to rate, review and subscribe, or share this episode with a friend. It really helps other people find the podcast.